And I got to tell you, Mario, that one of the first pieces is you have to learn how to be an effective communicator. If you can't communicate with another generation, it's pretty much game over. Yeah. That communication has to set some very clear expectations for what it is that we both do and how we do it and how we're going to interrelate and what I expect from you. And I'll tell you where we find the real crossover point in a lot of organizations is around the idea of respect. Boomers demand respect because of their status, their title, the way they grew up. You didn't question what someone older than you said. That was disrespectful. Millennials want to be respected, but they look at it in most cases completely differently. They say, I'll respect you when you earn it.
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. Kelly Riggs, I am so excited to have you on Selling with Social, man. It is a true honor and a privilege to have you here on the podcast this episode. I've been reading your work for a while now, and I know that you're the founder and president of the Business Locker Room. You're really focused in on sales leadership expertise. You've also published a couple of books, Quit Whining and Start Selling.
Yes.
And then I think it's one-on-one management. Is that right?
Yes. One-on-one management. What every great manager knows that you don't. How's that for a pretentious title?
I love it. That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I want our audience, we've got sales, we've got marketers, we've got entrepreneurs, business owners that are listening in to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do and how you help and any background that you want to give us.
Well, I went to college to be an engineer. I got 3 years in and decided that wasn't for me. In fact, I'll never forget, I was sitting in a class called Differential Equations and said, I will never do this for a living. So out I went. And as it turns out, I gave up a full scholarship. I was actually playing ball at the time at the University of Tulsa. Well, I was on the team. It's not quite the same, but I was on scholarship.
Slight difference.
Yeah, a little bit of a difference. I got to go out and run around on the field every now and then, when we were way ahead. But I did enjoy that experience, but I decided, I was ready to move on, and I decided to quit my scholarship, quit engineering, get a sales job. And on top of that, I just decided that would be a good time to get married as well. You can only imagine what my parents were thinking. But I did all that, and I got into sales right out of the chute. This was back early 80s. And I was selling office equipment, machines, that kind of thing, back when you didn't buy those things at Sam's or, Costco, and started in selling there. A few years later, I got into the orthopedics business, and I was in the medical sales world, and that's where I really took off. I was back-to-back salesman, national salesperson of the year. They put me into management and grew from there. So I've been in sales for 3.5 decades. I've owned 4 different companies now, so I'm a serial entrepreneur. Some have gone really well, some not so much, and that's the life of an entrepreneur. I'm sure you know.
I do.
And so it kind of built all the way up until a dozen years ago. I was asked to begin helping some people. A good friend of mine owned an accounting practice and said, hey, we need a little bit of help with some leadership and accountability and some things like that. And he knew me from a long time back, and I'd been a corporate trainer and, owned companies and all that. And one thing led to another, and I wound up in the Business Locker Room as a company, a solopreneur, consulting, and really working in 3 areas, Mario: sales and strategy, and then, of course, leadership. And those things tend to intersect a lot of times in companies.
Your story about starting out in engineering and then quickly figuring out that's not where you wanted to be reminds me of when I was going to college. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, so I was on the pre-law track.
So you took a step up and decided to go into sales. Good job.
Well, yeah, I did. And one of the challenges was, I'll tell you, one of the courses was Stats 101. Now, this is the beginner's course, right? This is the beginner's course, mind you. I couldn't pass I just couldn't get it. And I needed to get Stats 101 in so I can get the econ track going. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. That's it. I give up.
The legal profession lost a brilliant mind over Stats 101. All right.
I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you. I don't even understand why they had us take that course for the pre-law track, but nonetheless, it is what it is. Well, fantastic, man. One of the questions I love asking all my guests is tell us something that nobody would know about you by looking at your social profiles.
Well, I don't think it's in my social profiles. I actually owned a sports media production company and actually did some time as a sports radio talk show host as a part of our business offering. It was really interesting. A partner and I were in this company. We had a great time locally. We produced sports radio. We put high school football teams on the air. We did locker room shows. We did scoreboard shows. And one of the people I worked with said, man, you need to get your own show to promote your brand and all that. And I said, I don't know anything about sports talk radio. He said, not to worry, we'll teach you. And I fell for that nonsense. So I wound up actually on a couple of radio shows and found out, Mario, I really, really enjoyed it because it really was an extension of selling. What I would do on the advice of this individual was get great guests and do really powerful interviews. And we just got hammered. We had a show on Saturday nights on a 100,000 watt AM radio station here in Tulsa, owned by Cox Radio. And it was like number 13 in the marketplace on Saturday nights because everybody's listening to FM radio. But we have such a huge sports following here, especially collegiately, that this thing went to number one in just a couple of quarters. And I had so much fun doing it. I got to interview some of the top names in sports and writers and play-by-play guys and all that kind of thing. It was great fun. I really enjoyed it.
Well, if anybody listens to anything that you put out in your podcast, by the way, what's the name of the podcast that you've got today with your son?
It's at countermentors.com. It's called The Counter Mentors.
We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. But if you listen to that or any of your video content, when I first started watching your stuff, I said, this guy has got to be, he's got to be on sports radio. He's got to be a sports broadcaster. We need or a newscaster, one of the two.
I most assuredly have a face for radio. That's a fact.
I love it. Well, now it makes sense. It all comes together. That's the type of personality we need. Not to be sidetracked, but some of the stuff we hear is just like wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, it's a crowded marketplace, no doubt about it.
Nice. Well, you also have some cool things coming up right now.
Yes. You've
got an upcoming book with your son, Robby, and I think the title is Counter Mentor Leadership: How to Unlock the Potential of the 4-Generation Workplace. Did I get that right?
Absolutely correct. Yes, that'll be published in January of 18 by Hachette. And we have a wonderful editor named Allison Hankey. Really enjoy working with her. But this came about because both my son and I encounter similar kinds of generational problems inside the leadership work that we do. And yet we have much different perspectives. And so we started doing this podcast just as kind of a lark, just kind of funsy. And before we knew it, we had a couple of clients, and then we started talking to a book agent, a literary agent, and the book got picked up. But it is really, truly different in the sense that leadership is hard enough to begin with, as you know. Yeah. But now there's so many more things to deal with. You have to deal with distraction and change and complexity and so many other things. And so many boomer leaders in particular, Mario, are not equipped. This millennial generation is driving us, boomers, nuts. We don't know how to deal with them. We don't know how to adapt. And yet we conveniently forget that we were young once upon a time and they didn't know how to deal with us either. So it's really fun.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know in my last role, the VP of sales for a software collaboration company, one of the things that I decided to do was really take the generational gap and bring together a team that spanned all the generations. I'll be 40 next month. So I had someone who was the baby boomer and I had someone who was the millennial 25-year-old, then everything in between. And boy, what an interesting dynamic to have that in a sales organization and part of your leadership team. The ideas and thoughts you got from this end of the spectrum to this end of the spectrum were
miles apart.
Miles apart.
Or exactly.
In terms of approaches and how to engage and all those types of things. So I'm excited for that book.
Thank you.
You talked a little bit about kind of why you're doing it, but was there any one thing that inspired you? Did you see some particular event? Was there something that you saw that's fundamentally happening, continue over and over again that said, we've got to write something like this?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It did. It came about that way. A dozen years ago when I started doing what I'm doing now, I began to get calls. hey, we're struggling with this younger generation. And then it was the, millennials, because they got labeled, and everybody wanted to know, how in the world do we deal with these people? Because they're so different, forgetting conveniently that we raised them, but what as that may be. But my son, who was also in consulting, you referenced earlier, Robby, he began to get the same kinds of challenges and problems in reverse. He was getting you millennials are just so weird and this and that and the other. And he's like, well, hold up. Hey, hang on a second. We're doing a lot of really good things. And he and I, a couple of times, we're a very close family. He and I are very close. He mentored with me in college and learned a lot about business from me, and then went on to teach me a lot about the consulting world based on what he does now. And we enjoy this sort of counter mentoring relationship. I mentor him, he mentors me. And we found a dramatic need for that inside the workplace, because boomers don't adapt well in many cases. They don't do social, they don't do community, they don't do technology very well oftentimes. And that's what he saw. I saw it as well. And then about a year ago, we started talking about it in real earnest. And he said, Dad, we really need to do something with this, because this is a pervasive problem. I said, I 100% agree with that. And that's when we kind of took off. But we have a special flavor. You've seen some of our podcasts. We really banter. We give each other a hard time. We have a fun time with it. The last thing we want to do is write another boring leadership book. In fact, if I recall correctly, I think he put that in as a hashtag in one of the first chapters. Hashtag not another boring leadership book.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can tell it's got a big millennial flavor. It's going to have some of our sarcasm and snarkiness to it. It should be a great read, I think.
Yeah, it was funny. Actually, I was just doing an interview for another article that somebody else was interviewing me for. And they asked, what do you see as some of the challenges for leaders adopting social? And I said, well, I'll tell you what the challenge is. It's purely generational. Those that are 40 years and older are usually sitting in the director level and VP level roles, right? And we grew up, I'll be 40 again next month. And I've been in sales. This is my 20th year in sales. We grew up earning our stripes the way we've always done it in terms of how we sold. And so a lot of folks have struggled with the idea of you mean I got to actually engage with my clients online? Why would I do that? I'm measuring a cold call. I'm measuring the number of times you reach out. And the millennials are saying, are you freaking kidding me? I can get this appointment through this avenue. Why are you pounding me to make a phone call? So it's this interesting struggle that you've got that's happening in the workplace, especially.
Well, yeah, listen, it's more foundational even than that. I mean, that's an obvious one, I think. But you've got millennials who said, listen, I've been in business for 25 or 30 years and I'm very successful. I don't need some of that newfangled nonsense. And they waste so much time online and all that. You stop and say, wait a minute. Do you recognize that all the talent you're going to bring into this company in the future, that's exactly where they are? Yeah. You don't have any presence there, then all of your talent is going somewhere else. Listen, just get selfish about it. If you want better talent in the future, you got to go where the fish are, and they're on social media. You can't go fishing in a dry pond because those days are over. It's really that self-evident, but a lot of boomers don't get that.
Yeah. One of the things that I advocate as well, and it's interesting, is when I'm talking to a sales leader, look, there are people going to be in this silo, or in this silo, or potentially all three of them. I've got a Fortune 100 customer that literally the only time he responds to me, not voicemail, not email, text. I can book an appointment with him and have an entire conversation through a text messaging conversation. But I tell you, if I was a salesperson inside of a sales organization, it would drive my leader crazy that I'm actually booking appointments through text messaging.
100%. I've got a client exactly like that. And nothing could surprise me more. It's like, what? But to him, because he's got a certain personality style, he wants instant access. Man, he loves text. He thinks that's the greatest thing ever.
I love it. Well, I can't wait for that book to come to launch, because I think it really is a challenge that we have, is how to actually assimilate these generational challenges or gaps or even thought process. I know in my last role, as I mentioned, I hired a baby boomer and I hired the millennial and everything in between. And what was interesting is I could have the baby boomer, she would make hundreds of phone calls and do 30 meetings a month through cold calling. Whereas the millennial couldn't make a call for the life of him, but through social selling and through social activities, he could book 30 appointments. It was like at parity. And it was interesting. She couldn't do the opposite and he couldn't do the opposite. So it was interesting to see the dynamics. And at the end of the day, as a sales leader, I didn't care how you did it as long as you did it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that was important. But all right, I kind of digress for a moment there.
Sure.
Talking about the new book and just more of the concept, what makes this book different than some of the other sales leadership books that are out there. To Robby's point, this is not another boring leadership book. What makes it different in terms of the content that you'll give?
Well, we get into detail about the leadership challenges of the past. I mean, anybody who's spent any time in leadership, I think will readily acknowledge leadership is hard enough without everything else that's been sort of implanted in the organization in the last 15 or 20 years. With the advent of technology and a younger generation and the speed and pace of change and complexity and distractions, I mean, some of the data with regards to distractions in the workplace are indeed scary. So one of the things we want to do is identify some of these new challenges and how they impact a lot of the old challenges, building teams, creating culture, identifying whys. All of those kinds of things still exist. And the reality is, even outside of the new things, roughly 2/3 of all leaders are considered to be ineffective. That's a scary number. And you look at a lot of the data that we get from people like Gallup and Harvard Business Review and others, and you realize that being a leader is hard enough in good circumstances. Now put into that mix change, technology, and multi-generations who don't see things the same way. Yeah. It is a train wreck. And a lot of boomers are, they're like, okay, I'm done. I just can't deal with this anymore. And they turn into micromanager from hell. It's like, okay, this is the way it's going to be. And you're going to quit getting on your cell phone. We're going to eliminate the internet, all these ridiculous things that just don't work. They really fail to begin to look at talent. Robby and I working together created a methodology that we sort of both were doing in similar fashion, melded that, put it together into a methodology that we can teach and train leaders how to be effective in the workplace. And I got to tell you, Mario, that one of the first pieces is you have to learn how to be an effective communicator. If you can't communicate with another generation, it's pretty much game over. Yeah. That communication has to set some very clear expectations for what it is that we both do and how we do it and how we're going to interrelate and what I expect from you. And I'll tell you where we find the real crossover point in a lot of organizations is around the idea of respect. Boomers demand respect because of their status, their title, the way they grew up. You didn't question what someone older than you said. That was disrespectful. Millennials want to be respected, but they look at it in most cases completely differently. They say, I'll respect you when you earn it. So we hire someone, give them a job, tell them how awesome they are, give them an offer letter, bring them into the organization, and they don't come in and respect us because of those things. They sort of say, all right, now I'm going to see if I'll respect you or not based on the way you treat me and the way you interact. Well, there's a big clash in the workplace because of the difference in the way we see respect from each perspective. So getting on the same page in the interview process, in the hiring process, in the orientation process, helps people avoid a lot of those problems because boomers hire people and think they're going to be a certain way. They're not. Millennials come into a job and they think that everybody's going to be the way I am, and they're not. And when you have that real clash, especially of respect, if you don't get on the same page in a hurry, you're going to have all kinds of problems, and you will never learn enough management techniques to overcome it. You really have to. It's a foundational, systemic, structural, choose your word. It's an issue that you got to get in front of.
Those are some great points you mentioned. But how do you get on the same page in the interview process? I mean, that's one of the hardest things as a leader when you're going through this process. And the one thing as a leader, when I hired, whoever it is that we hired for, whatever the position might be, I always told candidates there were two things that they get to choose. First, they get to choose what company they want to work for. And two, they get to choose who they want to work for.
Yes.
So choose wisely is what I said.
100%.
And to that end, in the interview process, I encouraged them to go out and look at all my LinkedIn recommendations that talked about the style of my leadership. I would put them in front of my salespeople or fellow administrators or other folks in the customer success organization to let them interview people to see what my style was like and to understand, is this the type of style that you want to work for? And mine particularly was, I'm going to push you to the limits because that's where I know that you want to go. I want to find out where you want to go, and I'm going to get you there even if it makes you feel uncomfortable. And so putting them in front of other people, I felt like was a fantastic way to help them understand who they would be working for. And everybody would tell them, this is the style of guy that you're going to work for. you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. Is that how you solve that during the interview process, or what other ways can a leader solve this particular problem in the interview process?
Oh, you're definitely in the right pond. I can tell you that much. It all comes down to understanding each other prior to saying yes to the job. And, when we counsel people who are looking for jobs, quite often people call and say, hey, I'm getting ready to get a new job. I'm out looking. What should I do? The first thing we tell them is interview the person you're going to work for. And they're like, no, I'm going to interview. Yes, you need to interview the person you're working for so that you can get on the same page. One of the real challenges that exist is many times bosses are a certain way and the person is joining the company, but they'll wind up quitting the manager. Yeah. And if you don't understand and connect with the manager, you're pretty much doomed from the beginning. There's an old story that I like to tell that I heard many, many years ago about an older man who was a CEO of a company. He had the same administrative assistant for 20 years. And it was a female, and she eventually retired. And so he still had several years left, and he needed to hire someone to take her place. So he did what he always did. He hired somebody. He tested their speed on the computer, and did they know all the Microsoft Office packages, and could they do Word and PowerPoint and all that kind of thing, and did they understand business acumen? Did they present themselves professionally? All that kind of thing. He found this crackerjack administrative assistant, absolutely knew that she was going to be perfect. He offered the job. She comes to work, and the first day he sits down at his office like he's done every day for 20 years. He's expecting a newspaper and a cup of coffee, and he's going to sit down and take the first 15 minutes, right? Getting caught up and seeing what's going on. He's got the journal, and he's got his coffee. So he walks in, and it's her first day on the job, and she says, good morning, and he says, good morning. He walks in, no paper, no coffee. So he calls her and he says, listen, every morning when I start, I would like to have a cup of coffee and a Wall Street Journal. And she said, I don't do coffee. He said, excuse me? He says, sir, she's an enlightened, progressive female. She's not going to serve coffee. That's beneath her. And, he didn't communicate that well, didn't set that expectation. It's a great example. She left in the first week because there was a real clash of generations in that place. If you don't understand who's joining your company, and if they don't understand who they're going to work for, if you don't talk about the kind of people we are, the way we do things, what our general expectations are in terms of everything you can imagine, then you have the potential for conflict. If you think about it, and what we talk about in the training we do with companies is, what is conflict? It's when our expectations are not met and we get frustrated. So it's frustrated expectations. So if you never set the expectation to begin with, you've just opened up Pandora's box.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story, almost exactly verbatim. So again, I'll go back to my last role, VP of sales, and I had a sales administrator. A new VP came on board, and I said, sure, yeah, you could use our administrator, no problem. And so one day he was in a big conference room, big meeting, and he walked out and he went up to my sales administrator and he said to him, here, he gave him some cash. He goes, hey, go get me a, whatever it was a soup from, San Francisco soup company.
Okay.
Anyway, it's escaping me. Go get me this soup and make sure that you get me this type of bread, not the regular French bread that they give to you. And he looked at him and he wanted to strangle him. So he came into my office. I was literally in a meeting for a vendor meeting, and he knocked on the door, and I said, I'm in a meeting, right? And he goes, I need to talk to you. And I was like, I'm in a meeting. He goes, I need to talk to you right now. And I'm like right now? And he was like, right now. I was like, all right. So I asked the vendor, it was the CEO. I said, could you take your leave for a second here? He closed the door and he went off. He was furious. Who the H does this guy think he is to ask me? And what was interesting, it reminded me, because I thought, well, wait a minute. I've asked him to get food when he was going out. But the difference was, one, is that when I went out, I said, hey, you want me to get you something? So yes. I was willing to serve him as a leader, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, if I said, hey, could you do me a favor, right? This is how I position it. Not go get me. And he wasn't my dog. He was a human. He was a young person. And I said, even though he was a direct report to me, I said, could you do me a favor, please? I'm butting up against another meeting. Would it be possible for you to get me whatever it was out for food? And at the same time, here's an extra $15. Get yourself something as well, right? And the difference between how I approached it versus how this other leader approached it was like night and day. And I tell you, he never asked the millennial again, because when he came back, he brought him his soup, but he took him into the data center room and told him, don't you ever ask me to get you another thing again. And
Wow.
Used a couple words inside there.
And what's interesting is that my generation would have never thought about talking that way to someone superior to us in the organization. We would have never thought about that. And those kinds of conflicts are hidden all over the organization when it comes to generational conflict. And if you don't identify those, flush them out and have those conversations, I mean, you're just asking for problems.
And my response, right, here I am, I'm not the baby boomer, but when he told me what he said, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what? You can't say that.
You can't say that.
The HI can't, right? And I'm like, man, next time, I was like, you didn't even let me have a chance. Like, you handed him the food and told him off. Next time, let me do it for you. Like, I'll be your buffer, right? You report to me. But he handled it, and it never happened again, right? I mean, but therein lies that clash that you talk about. Like, boom, yes. It was like two worlds colliding, and one demanded respect, and the other one said, "You got to earn my respect." But there's also, I think, I would have never asked anybody to go get my whatever it was. I mean, that was just wrong to begin with. So it made sense,
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So I love this discussion because these are some of the things that we see every day in the workforce and some of the challenges. But what's interesting, Kelly, I want to ask you this question. A lot of leaders promote the best salespeople into leadership positions.
Sure.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a natural progression that as you excel, you're going to get to the next level and the next level and the next level. But that's not necessarily the best leader that you should hire. Right. So give us some advice. You've been at this for a long time. Best practices for what a managing leader should do before promoting somebody into a leadership role to ensure that they have the right fit.
Well, let me do a shameless plug. If you go to my website, bizlockerroom.com, just this past week, I wrote a post called The Sad State of Sales Training. And it extends not just to the salesperson, but to the sales leader as well. I much prefer to use the word sales leader. Sales manager sounds like somebody who's really good at systems and processes and CRM and social media applications and data and reports and budgeting and all that. Not to mislead anyone, those things are important. But it's the leadership side of what managers do, sales managers in particular, that really move the needle. Sales leaders need to be great coaches. And what we do is we take a guy like me. I'm as a perfect example. Number one salesperson in the country, 2 years in a row. They said, "You want to be a manager?" And of course, ego, the whole thing. Absolutely. And I like to joke, our leadership training was very sophisticated, Mario. It went like this. Good luck. That was it. That's all.
Which most leadership trainings are just like that.
Yeah, that's about all I got out of it. So I went out and made every mistake imaginable. I got to tell you, some of the best practices are that, number one, you need to identify if someone is predisposed to be a sales leader. You've got killer salespeople who are very much focused on what they do, and they really don't see the world around them. Nothing wrong with that. No type of criticism. It's just that they do what they do, and they're great at it. They're not really thinking about the world around them. Then you've got sales leaders who always tend to be the kind of people who are dispensing advice, showing somebody how to do something. I mean, they seem to have a natural affinity towards helping others. They're going to be at the top of my list for potential promotion. And then when I identify them, I want to begin to train them and change their understanding of what that role looks like. When you get promoted from the best sales guy to sales leader, they are telling you you're getting promoted because you're great at what you do, right? So we get promoted for what we do, knowledge, skill, performance. That's what gets us promoted. Then we become a leader and we say, now we expect you to create a team of people. Yeah. And no longer do we want to pay you to be good at what you do. We want you to help other people be good at what they do. And that is a giant leap. Two different skill sets, completely different. And so you really have to identify the skill sets that make for great leaders. And I believe you should start training them before, and you certainly shouldn't quit once you promote them. And we just walk ourselves down a dead end pretty commonly. I mean, the number of sales leaders who are, the perspective is that they're very, very good leaders is very small number.
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time trying to be promoted. If you look at my 18 years in corporate, so 1 year as an entrepreneur, 18 years in corporate, total of 19 years is my 20th year. In those 18 years, 15 of those 18 were spent in the 100% President's Club, right?
Right.
15 of those 18. And so as a young guy, I was like, I should be promoted. I couldn't understand why I wouldn't be promoted. And I realized that I had a great leader. His name was Kevin Kunkel. And one of the things that he realized about me was, I could really be a jerk.
That was that first sales guy I was talking about earlier, right? Yeah, me too.
And I needed to mature in my leadership development to ensure that I wasn't always the jerk, right? And that I worked with people, helped people to come along to be able to get where they needed to go. But one thing that he realized was that this type of mentality that I had, which eventually I got out of the jerk mode and it just became the direct mode, right? Sure. But he realized that I was the type of guy that could be used to do turnarounds. So go into an underperforming team, figure out where was the problem or problems, and eliminate those problems and help grow the company, right?
Yes.
And that was a very good quality for my style of personality. And I think, tell me what you think about this. As leaders, as we look at our people, you've got different types of qualities for different types of activities that we need in a sales leader. Some of them are the turnaround guy. Some of them are the maintain and grow. Some of them are build and run, right? Do you agree with me on that particular aspect in terms of how you should segment your leaders?
I do. I don't think there is a situation that you go into that you say, one leader fits all circumstances necessarily. Now, that's not to say that some leaders don't have that sort of well-rounded capability. Me, I was more of your vein. I mean, I was a charger, direct guy, get things done, fix it. That's a personality style, and then you look at the other side, people who are more people oriented, they go in and nurture the people and the teams and all that. I think that both sides of that need to learn the other side in order to create the really well-rounded leader. But the fact of the matter is, if I need somebody to do a turnaround, I need somebody who understands strategically, systemically what needs to get fixed. Yeah. And not every leader is a strategic or systemic thinker. Yeah. I think it's one of the really great talents that exist. You'll see some people are great coaches, but they really can't look strategically over the horizon or what's going on inside the organization. When you get both of those in one package, Mario, it's not very often you see that, but when you do, they're going to be world class. They've got CEO written all over them.
I definitely agree with you. And I think one other quality that aspiring salespeople who want to become leaders as well as sales leaders is thinking about the vision and understanding that vision. I think sometimes we get, especially first line sales managers, my gosh, we get so bombarded with the tactics, the tactical day-to-day of operations.
Yes.
We forget to pull ourselves back and see what's the bigger vision that we're going towards and what do we want to accomplish, which kind of leads me into my next question of importance of inspiring your team and how can sales leaders really figure out how to inspire their teams? What are those methodologies that work out there, if you would?
Boy, you've jumped off the deep end with this question because there's a lot of perspectives on how this works. The one perspective is built around compensation and how you use compensation and competition and achievement as something that drives people. Some people are driven by money. Some people are just driven by acknowledgement and respect and being seen as being one of the top people. And there's everything in between. I mean, you never know what motivates people. And I think the really effective leader understands to a person what motivates them across the board. But I think the really great leader, to be inspiring, has always got to be a source of knowledge and a source of encouragement. One of the things that I saw that served me well is I was always a learner. And to this day, I think one of the key indicators for success, whether at the sales level or sales management level, is how much of a learner are you? Leaders never quit learning. I think great salespeople never quit learning either. And I think it's the only reason, frankly, that I was able to be successful because I was bad. I mean, I was a bad leader and I just was unwilling to accept that. So I went out and found sources and learned how to be better. So when you're the kind of manager that can coach and develop, you see something that can change, you see something they can do differently, and you can gently get them to change what they're doing. A lot of leaders won't do that. They'll step in front of you and do it for you. They won't teach you how to do it. And I think that's really critical in terms of inspiring people because they go, I know my boss has got my back and he or she is willing to do what's necessary to help me improve. And assuming you are a learner, that's a great fit. The other side of that, though, is I think one of the real underappreciated leadership tools that are out there is encouragement. It's recognizing excellence. It's in being appreciative of what people contribute. It's truly looking someone in the eye and telling them how important they are and how much they mean to you and how much we're a better team because you're a part of it. And typically guys like me, ex-athletes, and hard chargers, we're like high five, good job, little fist bump, and that kind of thing. And that's all we've got. But when people feel valued in the workplace for what they do, they will jump off a building for you. They'll run through brick walls. And I think it's one of the real underappreciated tools. And by the way, costs you nothing to spend time encouraging and motivating people in that way. But I know, and I look back at my own history where people got the most out of me. They understood what motivated me, and they sit down and would talk to me face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and tell me how much they appreciated what I was doing, and they taught me how to get better. And we found that those things really move the needle in terms of engagement. Employee engagement is everything in the workplace. I mean, it leads to better productivity and profits and sales and less turnover and everything else that we care about. Learning how to engage people at the team level is really a critical skill.
And to that end, you mentioned something about learning about what motivates the individual.
Right.
And many years ago, this is well before, I'm going to go on record right now, well before Simon Sinek ever started talking about this why, understanding why.
Yes.
I started a process of what's called creating your why boards. And this was one of my methodologies that I used to figure out how to do a turnaround. And it was really to understand the employees. Why do they get up every single day to come here? And then have them to actually literally PowerPoint that, or in some cases they would put it on the old school elementary school whiteboards where they take pictures and they stick it on there with a glue stick.
Absolutely.
Is put their pictures on there and understand that whiteboard, and then understand what their personal goals were so that I can help get them to where they wanted to go, even if that meant that I was going to help get them out of my organization to the next tier. And a great example of that is I hired a millennial. His aspirations was to go work for a large software company because he was moving from telecom to a SaaS collaboration inside of telecom. And he wanted to get to Salesforce as an example, a Salesforce and Oracle. And I said, give me 2 years and I'll get you there. And we documented a plan. And after about a year and a half, guess where he landed?
Yeah, Salesforce, I'm sure.
Salesforce. And the crazy part about it was he wasn't afraid to tell me that he got an interview and someone called him to get an interview. And I was so happy for him that as his leader, I'm like, let's do it. Let me help you prep for it. And I was willing to do that as a leader, even though I knew it would hurt me from a production standpoint, but I was willing to do it. Why? Because I knew that when he came in, he wanted me to mentor him to get to place X. And I had my job was to get him there, even if that meant that he was going to leave me, because however long it took to get them there, as a sales leader, I knew that I would get 1,000% effort from him during that course of time.
Absolutely.
So that was a long way to ask. Question for you: the importance of a leader understanding an employee's why. Should that be a factor? Should leaders do those types of things?
Absolutely, yes. If a leader understands what drives someone, then they can clear the path, and that's what you did. But it's even deeper than that. Again, way back before Simon Sinek, we talked in great detail about mindset and goals and objectives and where do you want to go. I mean, all of that is just basically your why. You can take the why and bring it into a culture and create something bigger than yourself. But when people are getting up in the morning to do something that they believe in, whether it's money or vacations or a bigger house or just being recognized, whatever that is, right. I think that's critically important. And I'll tell you why. You hit so many of the hot buttons for engaged employees that it's really amazing. And it's no surprise to me that person responded the way they did. When an employee knows their boss cares about them, when they know that they're going to grow and develop as a result, when they know they're going to be valued for what they do, then their engagement is off the charts. And it's the way you create incredibly great functional teams is when everybody has the opportunity to do as much as they can, as much as the time as they can, the thing they love to do that will feed their self-interest. And yet they still fit into a team atmosphere, and their loyalty between them and their peers and them and the boss is incredible. And I do think, when we do our sales training here, we start with mindset, period. I mean, if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't plug into what motivates you, if you don't know what it's in that wall socket that drives you every day, then you're never going to be as successful as you possibly can be.
No, I hear you on that. And I'll repeat this again. I think this is such a simple exercise. You don't need to pay Simon Sinek $50,000 to come out and teach you how to do this. But the exercise literally is have your team, and my recommendation is have your team document why they get up every single day, why they find value, and what they want to accomplish. And then as a leader, pick 1 or 2 items to say, I can help with that. You hit the nail on the head, Kelly. The loyalty that you glean from just this simple exercise is crazy off the charts. anything that comes at you as a leader. And as leaders, sometimes, you have people, saying certain things or doing certain things, and they don't like the way you interacted or how you dealt with the situation. But you'll get just pure loyalty off that, and never, I don't know, just to me, never be afraid to get somewhere where they want to go, even if that means they leave you.
Absolutely. And what you're bringing out is so important. You have to know. I worked with a company a few years ago that their sales leader had a really innovative approach. Once a year around Christmas, early December, he would bring everybody into the room. He would give them large sheets of poster board. He would bring in like 100 magazines of every imaginable type, and he would bring in magic markers and colorings, things that you could use for color and everything. And he would say, I want you to create a board that indicates what you want to do next year. What's important to you? What's driving you? You want to cut out a picture of that new Mercedes E350, or you want to put numbers, with revenue, and you want to put dollar signs, or your vacation or whatever. Let's just sit and brainstorm about what you want to do next year that's going to help you get to where you want to go. I have never seen a level of engagement as high as that guy. Now, of course, it wasn't just due to that, but that was part of his whole approach to this thing. Is it's about you. And once we figure out what motivates you, we can help you get there.
I'll say the last comment on this one is I had a baby boomer who said, I don't want to be in the office 5 days a week. I'm more effective if I can actually work from home. And that was counterintuitive to the sales culture that we had.
Yep.
And I kind of felt like, well, if I have to do it for one, then I have to do it for all. So what I ended up doing is we did it for all for that one person. Everybody had the opportunity to be able to work from home a day or two out of the week. And if for some reason you weren't performing, well, you'd be back in the office like normal, right?
Yes.
And so we changed it. And boy, gosh, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd start getting emails from this baby boomer. And at 7 o'clock at night, it would be phone calls saying, can you help me with this? And it was like the amount of hours that she began working was longer because she had more productivity by only walking 20 feet as opposed to an hour and a half long commute.
Yes.
So just a small change in your mindset as a sales leader can help improve productivity.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
So I love asking this question, especially to leadership experts such as yourself. For those that are just starting out in sales leadership, what is one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice that you'd give them on how to be a coach that others want to follow? Not that they have to follow because they've got the title, but a coach that others want to follow.
Well, that's a really interesting question, because for me, all of my life, I've been a coach, and I've been a coach in kids sports. I coached kids football for 15 or 20 years, and I've lived in that world a lot, and I've seen a lot of very bad coaches on sports teams. And a lot of times I'll have, on occasion, I'll have someone say, sports analogies don't work for me and all that. I'm like, listen, it's not about the sports. It's about what you learn from it. And if you have kids that play soccer, or they go play Little League baseball, or they get into Pee Wee football, or whatever it is, they're going to be around coaches, and you need to learn to recognize good ones and bad ones. And the bad ones are more concerned about results, and the good ones are concerned about helping you get better at what you do. And that's really the differentiator. We talk about 3 levels of sales leadership. The first level is I try to manage results. I'm always looking at numbers in terms of what happened in the past. How much did we sell? How much margin do we make? Those kinds of things. And when those numbers aren't right, then I'm trying to tell people, you need to get better. You need to do something different. But I can't really translate it into a real skill because I've not made that connection. So what I do, Mario, is I assume. I'll say, the thing is, Mario, you're not asking for the order enough. Maybe I saw you one time not ask for the order. So that's got to be it, right? Or you're not making enough calls, or you're not setting enough appointments. But I really don't know. That's the nonsense that passes for sales management, which, by the way, was a title of a piece that I wrote once, The Nonsense That Passes for Sales Management. The next level is to get knee-deep in activities, which is a far cry better. We're looking at dials, and we're looking at demos and presentations, and we're looking at proposals, and we're looking at those numbers, recognizing that they actually lead to results. So we try to manage those things. That's the second level. It's not a bad place to be. The best place to be is managing an actual plan. When someone has a very distinct plan of how to go step by step to a predefined objective, then you can look at their plan and look at the activities that contribute to reaching those milestones and know if they're working or if they're making sense or not. And the ultimate coach can then look at your plan as a sports coach would do. Say, we decided to run this kind of offense and we're going to have this kind of game plan. And then we look at the play on the field and we go, wow, this isn't working very well. We need to make some adjustments. As I like to say, the best coaches make their money at halftime. They look at what's been going on. They adjust what's happening to help them rearrange their plan and stay on track. And I think the best advice for the new sales leader is help your people get better. But you can't help them get better at something that you don't have defined. In other words, if you say, look, you need to make more calls because that's how I was a great sales guy. I made 100 calls a day. That may not be what makes you a great salesperson. And by the way, I don't know if you're making good calls, if they're quality calls, if you're calling on the right person, if you're connecting to the right decision maker, if you're even calling on the right kind of account. That's where a plan comes into play. And I think that's the direction I would want to push new sales leaders, teaching them how to plan, teaching them how to help their people get better at all the critical skills. But number one, the planning skill.
That's a fantastic piece of advice. It reminds me of a book. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book called What Got You Here Won't
take you there.
Yeah. It's for the person who stepped now into a leadership role, right? From the individual contributor into the leadership role. But there's so many parallels in just life, personal relationships, growth, whatever it might be. I think you hit the nail on the head, which is the things that you did as an individual in terms of putting together your plan that made you successful, that got you to the role. We somehow forget when we get into sales leadership, because now we get focused in on the tactical, the operational, the reporting, the administrative, all the performance improvement plans, the end of year review, like all that stuff. We forget, man, what actually got me here to this position that will help my other sales folks get there. And I think that's an important element is putting that plan in place and forcing your team to document their plan.
Yes.
Without a plan, you have no plan. That's just it.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what substitutes for a plan. In fact, I asked a group of bankers that I was speaking to late last year at a conference. I said, can you tell me what's your plan? They said, well, we're going to do X million dollars. And I go, okay, so what's your plan? And they said, well, that's our plan. We're going to do this much revenue. And I said, no. Let me use Edward Deming's word. By what method are you going to produce that revenue? I want to know how you're going to get there. A budget is not a plan. A to-do list is not a plan. A revenue objective is not a plan. Their results or their milestones. But a plan is that step-by-step sequence. It says, I'm going to call on these accounts for this reason with this message because I've done my homework and they can take me where I want to go. I know I need a certain number of them in play in my sales funnel to have any chance to hit my numbers. I mean, the number one is, and number two is not close, by the way. The number one reason salespeople don't hit their numbers is they just flat out don't have enough qualified opportunities. They're kidding themselves. And I don't care how great a salesperson you are. If Mario is the salesperson of all time, the best of the best, and you have 0 sales opportunities, you don't hit your number. So how many sales opportunities do you have to have that are viable, qualified, and actually can take you where you need to go? And if you haven't planned that out, then you're just leaving the house or the office every day saying, I'm going to go work hard. Well, good luck with that. You're going to produce some results, no doubt, but you're going to waste so much time. And for a salesperson, the most valuable asset you have to play with is time. You can't give it away.
And that also applies to the entrepreneur, the business owner, the solopreneur. My gosh, like, you and I, we live this life.
Every day, absolutely.
Every day. And absolutely. By the way, I'm going to go on record saying, I think if you really want to be, like, you want to know whether or not you are a top dog salesperson, you go open up a business and be an entrepreneur and go 100%.
Yeah, that we'll figure it out real fast. That's right.
Exactly right. Listen, Kelly, it has been fantastic having you on Selling with Social. Last question for you. If someone wants to connect with you, reach out, ask you any questions, what's the best way for them to connect with you and contact you?
Well, first off, there's the website, bizlockerroom.com. You can connect there. You can find me on Twitter at Kelly Riggs. You can find me on LinkedIn at K Riggs. Make sure you connect with me. I'd love to know who you are out there in the professional world and see what we can do to benefit each other. Because when it all comes down to it, the one thing we learned from millennials, and I've learned from my son, it is all about the community, man. If you're trying to do it by yourself, that's a mistake. Way too many resources like this guy, Mario. Fantastic interviewer, and you got great content out there, man. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, brother, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. Fantastic. And for those of you listening, stay tuned for this next message here. Kelly, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it, buddy.
All right, be good.
Take care. Thanks for listening to the Selling with Social podcast. I'm super pumped that you are our guest today. Here's what I want you to do right now. Go to jr.com/podcast and support our podcast, please, by distributing it out anywhere you can get it to on social. And don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes. You'll find all the instructions there on the site on how to subscribe to the Selling with Social podcast. Until the next show, keep on rocking. Mario Martinez Jr. out.